everyone, Catherine here from Some on Sleeve, and today I've got a very special guest with me. We've got Brian Chung, my husband.
Hello.
So I've known Brian for, oh man, it's too long, 6 years, 7 years, I don't know.
6 years.
And he actually, one of the reasons we got together was he actually helped me find my first apartment, and he helped me buy as well, negotiate with my own realtor to get a $2,000 savings. So I brought him here because we were talking about financial literacy and savings and money and like just money in general, and just being a couple. Those are some topics that I think is very important to talk about when you're married or in a relationship. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, Brian, your background, your story, how you became who you are as a real estate agent from being a chartered accountant.
Okay, so yeah, thank you. I'm super excited to share my financial tidbits here with Some on Sleeve and my wife's audience here. And basically, yeah, my background is I'm schooled and trained in business from SFU. I've been a qualified chartered accountant since 2008, so it's been over a decade now, but I've started the accounting process in 2004. I guess a couple things that really stick out to me that are very close to my heart is basically one, when my parents lost their house when I was 4 years old, so back in 1983, and that's stuck with me ever since. And the context with that is I've seen my parents both struggle financially, always arguing, bickering, talking about money, and anytime they were really fighting, it was always something about financial. So to me, that's important. I don't know what happens in your household, whether or not you've experienced personally seeing your parents argue and bicker and banter and talk about money. Yeah. But I know it's very common, and not a lot of people talk about those things in the household. So that's the first thing. Okay.
So what would be like a first tip that you would give my audiences to?
I guess before we go on with that first tip, the second thing is basically I've been self-motivated as a result of that circumstance. So the environment that I grew up in and those things have really shaped who I am today. So growing up as a kid, I started working when I was 14 years old. I started saving at a very early age. I relentlessly pursued the financial freedom, the financial independence, and that route very early on as a kid, and that's been ingrained in me. And so I'm here to share with you practical, real experiences from a Canadian perspective that I can hopefully impact your lives, and hopefully if you take one or two things and you apply them, I know they worked personally. So yeah, so sorry to interrupt, and just wanted to make sure I added that fact in there.
So you've been reading my blog. That's some of the things that we discuss. Sometimes he interrupts me, but it's okay. We're learning as we go along. So if you could give someone the first tip on increasing their knowledge on financial literacy, what would that be, Brian?
Well, first of all, coming up with 3 top tips, they're very, very difficult. Okay, Catherine? But I felt like the first one that is the most important is the why and the what. I'm a big believer in knowing your desires, your beliefs, and your value systems in terms of why are you doing what you're doing, okay? So whether or not you're saving up $100 for that new pair of kicks, $10,000 for that dream vacation backpacking trip to Europe like I did back in 2008, or you're saving up a couple $100,000 for your first down payment for a home. It doesn't matter the size and the materiality of that dollar amount. It all starts with the same practical things. You start with the end in mind, the outcome, whether or not it's $100, $10,000, or $200,000, and you work backwards. Okay, so how are you going to get there? So obviously saving up for $100, making $30,000 a year, versus $200,000 down payment, they're very difficult in terms of size and the amount. But you got to start with that end in mind, see how you're going to get there, break them down into mini chunks, and then kind of go there, and you will get there. Okay, the second thing is that you got to understand the tax consequences. So it's good to also talk to your accountant if you're not very well versed in these things. know the CRA guidance. There's a lot of things online now that you can read. So a couple things is start with your outcome in mind, work backwards, and then know the tax consequences, because in Canada especially, our tax system and the regime is very, very complicated, to the fact of you need to know a lot of things. The more you know, the more that you can set yourself up for success from a tax perspective. Okay, so those are sort of the things you have to keep in mind. I want to also add, what you do in your 20s and in your teens, your 30s will thank you. And what that means is that will bring me to, you know, really my third tip. And ultimately, know, what are you saving for? Sometimes people save for the sake of saving. You just don't know when you'll need that extra cash or that rainy day fund or whatever. So
what would be some advice you would give for someone who's like in their early 20s right now, who's watching and just thinking about, well, when you're young, you kind of want to spend your money and kind of go big or go home, YOLO, right? So what would be some advice you'd give to someone who's young? And then on the contrary, like someone who's a bit older, maybe heading towards retirement, like thinking about their finances, that may be a little bit a challenge for them.
Well, I think the second thing I would really like to drive across is expenses. And it comes down to thoughtful expenses. And what do I mean by thoughtful expenses? You should ask yourself once, twice, 3 times before making that expenditure. I know I've talked about what people tend to waste their money on, you know, buying that latte in the morning, buying that latte in the afternoon, buying crap they don't need, maybe buying that extra pair of shoes they think they need, but they already have another 20 pairs sitting at home, or that clothing item gets stuck with its tag on, never gets worn, and things like that. People think they always need to make more money. You make more money, you're going to spend more. Someone who makes $30,000 and has a certain lifestyle will know the value of that $30,000 versus someone who makes $200,000 or $300,000. They're going to be spending more and have a much more lavish lifestyle. So with that in mind, be way more thoughtful about your expenses. And how you can be more thoughtful about your expenses is you can do you know, a self-audit. You can look at your past 6 months of your Visa statements or your credit card statements, and sort of understand and break down them into small little buckets. Dining out, eating, clothing, entertainment, travel, drinks, and then get a full understanding of that. And I think once you do a self-audit and you're more self-aware of what you're spending, you could sort of plan and go back to step 1 and say, hey, these are the goals and these are things I want to try and get to. At the end of the day, it's really about how you spend, and that will drive really everything else. I really believe that.
What about investing? Like, what do you think are some ideas for someone who could kind of learn to invest? If they've never invested before, like what would be something you could tell them?
That's a great point, and that drives to my final point. The third point is basically saving and investing. I think you've probably heard it from your dad before, you heard it from your mom before, and other relatives. Everyone has heard before. It's never too late to start saving. And not only saving, understand the different investment options and vehicles that are out there, and to use them to your best advantage. Like, for example, our family household, when our daughter was just born, we opened up an RESP account. We utilized that 20% grant right away, because we knew right off the top of your head, it's so hard to make 20% return on any sort of portfolio, let alone the government's giving you that for free. So understood that. We basically self-educated ourselves on what's out there, and did that. And you never know, going back to a rainy day fund, you may not know what exactly